Welcome home. Two words that as veterans and, well, even civilians for that matter, we seek. We find places in our lives that we want to be, where we feel at peace, at home, where we can be ourselves. And that's what this podcast is all about. As we lean in here to episode 7 with my co-host Dylan, we're going to talk about loss. Loss is something we experience throughout our lives in the veteran community. I'd argue we experience it maybe more frequent or at a younger age, and it's something we that are here need to work on. And I know myself, I look to people like Dylan to support me on it. So Dylan and I are going to talk about it and get right to it. So Dylan, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, of course. Loss is a special topic to me, and one that basically has bolstered all of my work in many ways. Because you're right, like when as a veteran, you get to experience loss a lot differently than most of the population, and in ways that can really, you can't put words to it. But then on top of that, you have to experience loss just like the rest of the population. You're going to lose your mom, you're going to lose your dad, you're going to lose your brother, sister, grandpa, grandma. But then you join the military and you're going to lose a brother, you're going to lose a father figure, you're going to lose what feels like a son at times, or sister, right? Like it can be so many different things and in so many different ways, training accidents, combat, suicide, just so many complicated and very unmistakably veteran experiences. Loss can be remarkably traumatic and can be remarkably confusing. It can be everything. And a lot of my work, again, sits on that. And I find it both tragic and fascinating at the same time to try and figure out how to delve into that. It's been something that I've really struggled with throughout my life until recently, and even recently I've struggled with it. I lost a soldier of mine that I was in command of in Afghanistan a year after our deployment last year, which was remarkably confusing and difficult, and you really just don't have the words for it. But on top of that, life happens, and I've lost many things in my life, but it all comes back to, what is your purpose and how do you find your way through it? And there is no words that make it better. There's no words that make it easier. And at any point in time, I don't think there's anything that really allows it to be felt with any more ease. It just becomes more accepted, more understood, maybe. And that's about the best people can do. I don't think if you talk to someone that has lost someone, you should talk to them and try and comfort them. I think you should talk to them in a way that helps them understand, because I think that is more beneficial than comfort ever will be.
Yeah, so I'm working through this right now. That's why it was on my mind, and that's like I feel lost dealing with loss. The mechanical part of me is like, okay, and as a business owner and leader, and it's like, okay, well, what's the next thing on the list that needs to happen? Okay, let's do that, right? And I am right now going through this, and I'm very much in a production mode, right? Very much analytical, objective, and it, like, I know it's going to hit me. It hasn't, I'm not angry. I'm not bargaining. I'm not going through the grieving. The grieving part hasn't even hit me. I'm in pure operations mode.
It's called denial.
We lost it. Yeah, so maybe that's it. Maybe I'm just in denial. I haven't. Yeah, you're right, because I haven't even. Whatever. I'm like living right there, where I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Whether it's like completely understood and felt as denial doesn't matter. It's more of like the body saying, "I'm not going to feel this right now," and that is the essence of denial.
Okay, and that's exactly okay. That's in words. That's verbatim. What I am feeling or lack of feeling. And it's like right now as I'm facing this, and when we're facing this, I feel like I should feel more, and I also know that it's like bubbling inside me, and I want to do something right now to bring it to the surface to deal with it. Like I'm a high conflict person. Mm-hmm. I like conflict because the sooner we do conflict, the sooner we resolve. And I also know when I got back from Gitmo, having come off my deployment in Iraq, I didn't deal with anything. I just partied and was homeless and lived life. And then when it hit me all at once. And then when I got back from Gitmo, I thought I could expedite the whole process of coming home, and you can't expedite those feelings, right? I talked about that on my TEDx, and now here it's like I want to take on this next battle head on, and there's really not a battle. Like I don't know what to do here. Yeah,
that's the interesting part. If a lot of people consider it a battle, but realistically, it's a battle within yourself. Right? And so, like, people fight those feelings. They live within denial, in many ways, of saying, "I'm not going to feel this." Mm-hmm. It's comforting to hear you say, I know I'm going to feel this, because you should. Mm-hmm. Right? It's necessary. It's if you live within denial, you're emphasizing the stress on your body and just creating new problems. But you have to feel, and you have to feel your way through all of it. You have to feel the confusion. You have to feel the pain. You have to feel the anger, the sadness. You've got to feel everything that comes with a loss like you've faced. And you may not get all the answers, but you do certainly have to feel it. And in some way, you have to then develop this perspective that allows you to continue forward and live in a way that is hopefully positive. But you do have to live at some point beyond this. And
the challenge I'm faced with right now, this week, today, this moment, even right before we came on the podcast, it's, does the show go on, right? And I'm speaking metaphorically, right? But to a certain extent, like, hey, do I sit down and do a podcast? Do I sit down and do the next thing on my schedule? Do I wipe my schedule and sit in silence? Like what? What is the thing to do? Is doing something better than nothing, or do I need to sit in the nothingness? I know I don't want to be busy, because busy for busy's sake is that's delaying the inevitable.
Mm. Well, honestly, the answer's there's no answer, right? Like, could be all of those. It could be any of those, right? It could be one or the other, but the reality is you won't know until you find out. And so your best guess is your best guess, and that's all it can be afforded to you, unless you've been through so much loss that you know exactly how your body handles it, which isn't most of us. It just becomes a guessing game, and it's one that you can't really predict, from what I've seen, and especially from what I've experienced. It's what's going to happen is you're gonna feel it when it comes. Because there's a really good poem, or at least a paragraph. I'm not sure if it's a poem, but it's called "Grief." It comes in waves, and it describes grief as the ocean, right? Then and a beach, in the scenario of sometimes the waves are going to be big, and they're going to hit hard and crash, and sometimes the tide's going to come out and it's going to be low and softly coming in, and that's grief, right? This idea of it's going to crash sometimes, and it's going to slowly lap its way in, and it's not always going to be the same, right? You might feel it 10 years from now, remembering this moment, or you might feel it tomorrow, or you might feel it tonight. You might feel it in 3 weeks. You could feel it again 25 years from now when you're thinking about what was the right decision for you. Realistically, there's no right decision. It's just a decision. Right and wrong has nothing to do with loss. It just is what it is.
Yeah, no, I found this poem, Nicole Gabbert. Says grief after the initial shock of loss comes in waves. When you're driving alone in your car, while you're doing the dishes, while you're getting ready for work, and all of a sudden it hits you, much how very much you miss someone. And your breath catches and your tears flow, and the sadness is so great that it's physically painful. Another one that is grief is the ocean. It comes on waves, ebbing and flowing. Sometimes the water is calm, and sometimes it's overwhelming. All we can do is learn to swim.
Here's the one
Yeah, please.
Grief comes in waves. As for grief, you'll find it comes in waves. When the ship is first wrecked, you're drowning, with wreckage all around you. Everything floating around you reminds you of the beauty and the magnificence of the ship that was and is no more. And all you can do is float. You find some piece of the wreckage and you hang on for a while. Maybe it's some physical thing. Maybe it's a happy memory or a photograph. Maybe it's a person who's also floating. For a while, all you can do is float and stay alive. In the beginning, the waves are 100 feet tall and crash over you without mercy. They come 10 seconds apart and don't even give you time to catch your breath. All you can do is hang on and float. After a while, maybe weeks, maybe months, you'll find the waves are still 100 feet tall, but they come further apart. When they come, they still crash all over you and wipe you out. But in between, you can breathe, you can function. You never know what's going to trigger the grief. It might be a song, a picture, a street intersection, the smell of a cup of coffee. It can be just about anything, and the waves come crashing. But in between waves, there's life. Somewhere down the line, and it's different for everybody, you find that the waves are only 80 feet tall or 50 feet tall. And while they still come, they come further apart. You can see them coming. An anniversary, a birthday or Christmas, or landing at O'Hare. You can see it coming for the most part and prepare yourself. When it washes over you, you know that somehow you will again come out at the other side. Soaking wet, sputtering, still hanging on to some tiny piece of the wreckage, but you'll come out. Take it from an old guy. The waves never stop coming. Somehow, you don't really want them to, but you learn that you'll survive them, and other waves will come. You'll survive them too. If you're lucky, you'll have lots of scars from lots of loves and lots of shipwrecks. And that is it.
I appreciate you reading that. You know, that was like that whole sequence there. That's like it's such a typical thing I do. I'm like, oh, let me just Google the answer and come up with the answer, and then read the first poem that comes to mind, or read right. Here's the first answer. Let's right like this is why you're in my life, right? Because I'm like, oh, what's the problem? Here's the answer. Let's move on to the next thing, you know. And even now, it's like, as you're reading this poem, and I found it, and I was following along. Yeah, I'm one of those like, okay, like let me hit all the fucking, let me just hit them all as fast as I can, and I'll get to the other side. Well, there is no other side with waves. And towards the end there, what you said is like, it's that it's this adage that to live is to grieve, to live is to go through this. Like, you can be the shipwreck, or you can be the one that hits the waves. Like, those are your two options. It's like, those are your two options. Like that last line it's such a beautiful line, right? And the last two lines. If you're lucky, you'll have lots of scars and lots of loves and lots of shipwrecks. I mean, that's life. You got to live, right? As you started reading this, I thought about my grandparents, and what that was like for me. And even, it's interesting, you said landing at O'Hare. I recently, I was dating someone I actually met at O'Hare. I was Bumble while I was at O'Hare. O'Hare is about 90 minutes from where I live, but 90 minutes we'll call it. And she worked in the area. I dated her for 2 years, and no shit, the last 3 times I've flown, and gone to O'Hare, I'm like 7 minutes from her house, and I can't stop.
Right.
It hits me.
Yeah.
It's like, I know she's in my past right now. I don't know what the future holds, and it hits me. And it sucks. Like the one I had a complete stupid breakdown. And the next time, like you're right, like it says, like you anticipate it. Right? Like I anticipated it, and it was still, I'm anticipating a 10-foot wave, and it was 80 foot, and it hit me. And I was like, man, this sucks. Right? This sucks because of the loss. I used to have something, and now I don't. And that sucks. And that's a breakup. Right? But those are the micro, right? Like grief and loss comes in all forms. I think that's the part that being a veteran is different than civilians, is that we accept this early. Like I was talking to someone earlier, I in my CEO roundtable, we often talk about, there's this thing called the green box. A story about a a gentleman who had a green box, and he letter to his wife and letter to his kids, and all if anything to happen to him, everything was right there, right? And it's like, I've met so many people in their 30s, 40s, 50s that have never talked about or thought about life insurance or a will or any of these things. And it's like, I mean, you don't even get out of reception battalion at basic training. You don't even get to basic training without filling out life insurance, paperwork. Yeah. And then you don't deploy without a will. So it's like, and right then that's that's the extreme, right? The acceptance of your own fate. And on top of it, because of, right, you have the loss of your hometown or your identity or your family, because now you shipped off on your piece of government property, right? And right, you lose all those identities, and then we know in the military, people come and go. A lot of I meet people that have worked in the same company 10, 15 years with the same group of people, and I'm like, oh my God, you know how many people I've worked with in the military, and that's a normal come and go. And then on top of, I remember when this was probably 12 years ago, in the reserves, we lost a guy, good young kid, driving to drill, right? Yeah. Car accident. Like this wasn't in combat. This wasn't training. This wasn't suicide. He was on his way to drill. And it's like, and here's a kid I knew for a couple of years, and he was fresh out of basic, and he would have made a hell of an NCO someday. And it was like, and you know what? The show went on, right? We did what we did as a unit, and we moved on. And it's I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I haven't thought about him in years, whether that's right or wrong. And now, like, even at the beginning when you said, hey, soldier, it's like, yeah, that was boom. Like there's that wave. There's that wave I didn't even know was out on the horizon, hit me. And I remember that moment, right? We lost a guy in Iraq, and I think about him often. There was a guy I went to basic training with that he got killed before I even went to Iraq. Like I went to Iraq within a year of basic. He got killed in that first year. Like, I mean, we weren't even home from basic 3-4 months. And I couldn't even tell you who. Someone told me, oh yeah, by the way, Kilpatrick got killed. We were both 88 Mike's truck drivers. Like, let's go to Iraq. And it's like, and I'm 21, 22, right? And the guy that I could have been in his boots all the same, he could have been in mine. But maybe again, this is where this podcast and the way we live our lives as veterans, it's different than civilians. I'm not saying it's better or worse. I'm not saying it's easier or harder. It's different.
Yeah. That poem reminds me of a lot of things. And it's funny that none of them are the military, which should probably say a lot about my life and how much I've lost. Because I've lost more soldiers from outside of combat tenfold than I ever have in combat. Now I found this poem after my wife and I's second miscarriage.
Yeah.
And then it just always brings back a lot. And I think that's the interesting thing is we as veterans, you said at the beginning, we accept that this is our life, but we don't accept grief. I don't think we accept loss as well. I think we like to live in denial. Even myself right now, like there was obviously a lot of feelings that I had not recently considered. If all of that came out from this poem, my guy, I mean, my loss started at 6 years old. I lost my dad to suicide at 6 years old, and then, I mean, we could consider everything that went along with that. I lost an entire side of my family because of it, and then the next man that was in my life abused me physically, and then became, obviously, my mom exited that relationship, so I lost that whole way of living, and then it was single mom for until whenever, and so like I've consistently lost things along the way, but that first loss, right, like the loss that deeply impacted me at 6 years old and honestly brought me to the military, is the reason I joined the military, was because I told myself at 7 years old that I wouldn't commit suicide. I would never do what my dad did. But along the way, I just consistently found pain, right? I never knew how to grieve. I never knew how to, to accept the waves and realize that they were going to keep coming all my life and be okay with that. What I did was, this is too much, but I can't kill myself. And so my choice was, the reason I joined the military, and I've talked about this a lot before in my podcast, but the Army was the way I was going to die. At least initially. Obviously, that's not where it is now, but that was my choice. My choice was 100%. I joined the infantry because I was like, well, that's the easiest place. That just makes sense. And so like my whole career started out based on this idea of not dealing with loss and not accepting it, not realizing what it was and how it affected me and how it affected my body, how it affected my relationships, how it affected my choices. And I don't think I'm alone in that. I think I've talked to a lot of people along the way who were like, yeah, that's kind of how I felt. It's like I think I'm lucky to have made my way through to this point to understand what that choice was for me. And even now to realize, like, just through words, that I allow grief to be felt, right? And I know, who knows, 10,000 people could watch this podcast and see me crying through this poem. And maybe anybody else would look at that and say, well, I could never do that. I would never allow myself to be seen crying. But I'm like, I don't give a shit. That's something that needs to be felt as human. And one of the things that I've always kind of set myself against is this idea that as an infantryman, I need to be this stoic representation of no emotion. I think that's ridiculous. I I have emotions when I need them, and I lead that way, and I've saved soldiers' lives because of it, because I've been able to feel with them and allow them to be human with me when they need to be human, and when I need them to be inhuman and savage, I can ask them that because I've allowed myself to be vulnerable with them to help them understand, like, hey, I'm only asking you to do something that I would do with you. And that creates a relationship for me. But I didn't do that initially. I was the same, savage infantry dude that didn't have any emotions, that bottled it up. And I had my own addictions, and so did everybody else, right? Alcohol, tobacco, anything, right? Like so many different things kind of distract us from these feelings that literally just need to be felt, need to be allowed. Like I needed that. I needed to read that poem apparently and feel this because that's my wave, right? I didn't see it coming, but I accept it. And I think a lot of people out there who have felt loss before also need to allow that feeling to be felt and to be understood, and also be in a presence with people who respect that and understand that. I think that's what at times the military is missing, because we're always expecting ourselves to be, going to war every second of every day. And that's just not the case.
Well, stoic is not a word that people would use to describe me. Or I would describe myself, even enjoying the military. I'm the one that I couldn't even stand straight in formation. I always twitchy and turn it right. I'm that, like that part, So I, even my parents, my mom says I have an older sister and 2 younger brothers. Of the 4 of us kids, I was the most emotional, and I know that's one thing I wanted to curb. Right, I was kind of whatever. I looked at the military as a way to compress my emotions, or as a way to be a man, be an asshole and keep that shit in check, and. In the military, I got caught up that's when I failed in the military, was because I let my guard down and I let my emotions fly, good, bad, or indifferent. And same in the civilian world, right? What makes us human is what I appreciate and enjoy and love the most. And that's one of the reasons I go hard in all that I do, is because it's like, I'm going to be me, and if it's good or not, so what? At least people get a really clear understanding of what I'm all about in that moment. And now I realize I'm 38. It's something I still wrap my head around. It's like, when do you let your walls down and let people in? When do you have a good cry? And when do you gotta buck up? I'm the first person to tell people to figure their shit out and quit bitching and make it happen. That's where I struggle. It's like, where do you, how do you, I don't even know the right word, how do you become intentional among the chaos? Right? Because that's what it, for me, it is, like intentionality among the chaos.
Yeah.
Right? What can I do? Right? And not a rhetorical question. What can I do? What will I do? And then commit to that thing. And with emotions, there's not that thing. So it's like,
yeah, that's the wrong question when you consider emotions. Because when you consider emotions and you say, what can I do? You're automatically asking a question that cannot be answered, right? Because it's not about what can I do. Yeah. It's asking what do I feel, right? Yeah. And then rather than doing something, you have to sit and you have to reflect. You have to understand what is happening. And allow that to be felt, and that's not meant to be done. That's not meant to be. I'm not supposed to do something while I do that. It's I have to sit here, right? And I try to do this, right? I try and be intentional about this. Is that poem speaks to me in ways that deeply impact me. And I read it, but I pause my way through it. And I just let that be felt. I was feeling all sorts of things. I was thinking about my dad. I was thinking about Wasendorf, the soldier I lost last year. And then I was also thinking about the miscarriages. I was thinking about the babies I lost, and also the baby I have right now that I've been fortunate enough to, for her to survive to this point and to become our rainbow baby has been something that, in all the irony of my life, of me almost ending my life at 25, I mean, all the things that I have now is remarkable, right? And so like there's the sadness that I feel in the grief, but then also the joy of recognizing what I've built and what I've pulled together from a life that was a millimeter away from death, right? And so like I see this dichotomy and this irony of just how close I was to death, and yet at the same time I have developed this remarkable life that I now live with you, and all the people that I have in my life. But I feel that because I must, because it reminds me of exactly what my purpose is. In many ways, like my overarching purpose is to enjoy the passage of time, because for the first 25 years, I did not. I refused to. I wouldn't allow myself to look around me and enjoy life because my dad was gone. That was number one rule. I couldn't enjoy life. And now I look at myself and I say, how can I enjoy the passage of time? How can I look at the world around me and what I have and what I don't have and say, how can I enjoy this? And I did not do that for 25 years. And it destroyed me. It put me to the point where, I almost broke the one rule that I made after, watching my dad absolutely destroy our family. Whether it was his intention or not, it doesn't matter. It's just, that's what happened, and I watched that, and I was about to do the same thing without regard for other people. And, it's not about selfishness or selflessness, because in many ways it's both, but I didn't put it together until the latest second, right? I was literally a millimeter away from pulling my Glock 34 trigger. And now I'm here, and I'm having conversations about things that most people won't, because somebody told them not to, or somebody showed them that the shame wasn't worth it, the guilt wasn't worth it, or showing feeling is his weakness. And I just don't give a shit, because I'd rather feel it and let people think I'm weak and prove them wrong, prove them wrong in other ways. And, I don't even need to prove it to people. Honestly, I know who I am. And that's the confidence that has come from me looking at myself rather than looking at me through other people's eyes. I just don't care about what other people look at me in those ways, because I've looked at me through other people's eyes for far too long and realized that's not how I engage with life. That's not how I enjoy the passage of time. It doesn't fit my purpose. And so I don't do it anymore. And grief in many ways taught me that. It's the best teacher on the planet, just because it's the harshest experience on the planet. And when you come out of it, you can either, just like the poem says, be a shipwrecked, or you can survive it. But it's choice. I've seen people do both. I've seen people walk to the end of the plank and jump, and I've seen people walk to the end of the plank and come back. and live beautiful lives, but it takes work, it takes effort, it takes recognition of self, and it takes a hell of a lot of thinking. And feeling.
Yeah. It's interesting you talk about how up until 25, and I'm ruminating on this, up until 25 you were, how did you say you were accelerating the passage of time, or how would you say that was?
I was not enjoying the passage of time. I refused to enjoy the passage of time.
So what was it instead?
You know, it's a hard thing to determine, because in many ways I felt like I wasn't good enough. But in many ways I saw it, right? Like, so I recognized that I was good enough, right? Like, in my military career, I've really never really made a massive mistake that has set me back in any way. I've accelerated or excelled remarkably well in the military. I've just done good things. And I knew that, right? Shooting. I love shooting. I always was confident shooting. And I did it really well. In school, I love school. I did it really well, right? I mean, I could pick and choose all the things I was really good at. But then I looked at it. I looked at life in this boyish way. I looked at, but my dad's not here to tell me I did a good job. And so I would pluck anything good from myself and say, it's not good enough, right? You got to do better for him to see you, right? And then in this immature and, you know, like I said, boyish, it's this, when I lost my dad at 6 years old, I grew up immediately in some ways, and I stayed exactly where I was in others. And in my emotional maturity, I stayed exactly at 6 years old. And then I think my perspective looked at how I should feel about myself through those lenses, right? My 6-year-old lenses looked at myself and said, well, Dad left us, so you're worthless. And that's how I looked at life. And I don't think that's far off from how, you know, we get these chains of suicide in the military, where one guy goes, and then the next guy goes, and then the next guy goes, and then the next guy goes, because it just, in some way, our emotional maturity looks at that and says, well, you know what? There's nothing left for me. My brother's gone. It's time for me to go. Or whatever. I don't know how people look at it, but I know how I looked at it then, and it was in a way that took away all credit that I had built for myself. I didn't even allow it. I wouldn't allow myself to enjoy things. I wouldn't allow myself to enjoy life. The beautiful things that I see now and I love and enjoy now, I had them all back then, but I wouldn't allow myself to enjoy them.
Yeah, I didn't know this at the time, and in reflection, I understand that the times of my life, and same with you, I've read a lot about this, and it's interesting with you because you have a pretty extreme example of what happened when you were 6. But essentially, whatever your insecurities are, go back to the child inside you, right? And it's somewhere the 4 to 7 range, right? So yep. Pretty significant that at 6 years old, you had a life-altering, significant event that really defined who that inner child is, right? Who is the struggling child inside you? It's also interesting that you brought up the not good enough feeling, right? I always attributed my success on the spite, right? I lived off of the spite of what others told me I couldn't do. And I talked about that for years. And I talked about the chip on my shoulder, right? And I was dancing, and I didn't even realize I was dancing because it was like, okay, well, I got a chip on my shoulder. I'm going to figure this out. It wasn't until the last 6 months, as I was about 2 years into therapy with my current therapist, counselor, whatever she is. I don't know what the proper nomenclature is. Counselor, we'll call it. And she's the same one I had coming out of Iraq, and that was more fix me. This is now more I would say maintenance. Maintenance is well, I guess it is more maintenance. It's less I'm totally fucked up, more how can I be better every day. Anyways, in working with her over the last 2 years and having gone through the last relationship in the last 2 years that I alluded to, I realized it isn't spite and it isn't the chip on my shoulder. The opposite of you is I have a really close relationship with my father, and I still do. I talk to him 3-4 times today, and I still feel not good enough for him. That's where it was planted, and it was planted at that 5-6 years old that I'll never be as strong or as tough as my dad. I'll never be able to do things as well as him. And then there was bullies in grade school and in high school, and then there was I almost failed out of high school. And had I can remember like it was yesterday, my grandparents pulled me aside. I think it was my sister's graduation, so I'd have been a sophomore going into my junior year, or maybe it was the next summer. They were crying. They were weeping, saying, hey, all we want is all of our grandkids to graduate high school. And at the time, I was not on track to graduate high school by any stretch. And I really didn't kick it until senior year. Junior year, I was even worse. And I was smart enough to figure it out by about the second semester of my senior year to be like, okay, this is the bare minimum. I knew it in my head. I knew in my head this was the bare minimum I need to do, and I did less than the bare minimum. And then I blamed the bullies, and I blamed the kids or the teachers often, especially in high school. I blamed the teachers, saying, well, they weren't giving me a fair shake, and I don't learn in their style. And then I joined the military, and it was like, well, this isn't for me. It's like all my life I've had this notion of why it wasn't me, or I've embraced it by saying, well, it's a chip on my shoulder. And only in the last few months have I really honed in on the consistent thing here is this idea that I'm not good enough. I wasn't good enough when I was a carpenter. I wasn't good enough when I was in Gitmo, because unlike you, I did almost lose my military career. I got kicked out of my platoon. I got a relief for cause NCR. I got a letter of reprimand. And then I eventually got kicked out of my company because I went to IG, and I fought it even harder because I'm like, well, I'll play by your fucking rules. And then rules are only as good as the people that are in charge of enforcing said rules. And then that didn't work. Well, I mean, it worked. I mean, I got kicked out of my company, and, first sergeant commander got relieved at the end of the tour. And so it did work. At the time, it didn't, But it's this idea that I was not good enough. And I'm not saying everyone has that. Let me preface that. I'm also looking at this book I read recently called The Mountain Is You. I spent, right before Christmas, I started reading books. I got to read whatever. I read 6 books in 2 weeks. I was like, man, I'm going to read so many books this year. And then it took me 6 weeks to read the next book. Because this book, it's called The Mountain Is You. I've talked about it here. It's still sitting on my desk. Transforming self-sabotage into self-mastery. And we all have self-sabotaging behaviors. Every single one of them is within us, and then some of them are stronger than others. And my ultimate self-sabotaging behavior is this idea that I'm not good enough. And that's something I've struggled with. And now that I can acknowledge it, knowing is the first step, and it's not the only step. And now I have to see in these moments now, right, when I'm dealing with working through this loss. I don't like the term dealing with. I'm working through this loss. It's like I'm questioning who I am and how I'm showing up. And it's like, well, you are good enough. And even hearing you say, well, there isn't an answer right now. Like sit and think and feel and meditate. Like that's what I need to do. And that's very complicated for me. Right? It's a simple behavior, and it's so complicated.
The interesting thing about the feeling of I'm not good enough is that it's both right and wrong.
Absolutely right. I love that you said that, because it's true. It's like, okay, I'm not good enough, right? Look, because let's say that's true. Well, there's two courses of action. I can accept that I'm not good enough. Yeah. I mean, I guess there's a couple courses. I guess the immediate one is here are the 3 courses of action. I can accept that I'm not good enough. I can accept that I'm not good enough for that person, right? And I can change the person or the room or the audience, right? And that's right. And so I'm accepting that, right? It's true. Someone says that. Or there's more external, or focusing more internal. I'm not good enough, and what I'm going to do about it, right? What do I need to do to be good enough, right? And so again, it's even in the self-sabotage book. It's like every one of those things that you use as self-sabotage, that's the pain, if you will, that you can transform into passion to define your purpose, right? You know it so well, it matters to you. And because it matters to you, it's within you. If you said, hey, Andy, I need you to take something that's not important to you and go build a life out of it and use that as your fuel. Well, my tank doesn't run off of that fuel, right? My tank runs off of this idea that you're not good enough. And that's why, every day I post something on Facebook. Every morning I post a meme on Facebook that hit me in some way, shape, or form, right? And it's like, that's my way of saying, I don't have all the answers today. Most days I don't. And I have this one. Today, this is the answer. Don't know what the question is, and this is the answer today. And it makes me feel good enough for that moment. And also, the other beautiful thing is it allows me to share with others my insecurities and my doubt and what I use to get through every day. And then when the amazing thing happens is people start reaching out to you, and people start talking to you. I mean, that's how this podcast evolved. It's like, for a lot of people in the civilian world, I'm the veteran they know. I'm the token veteran in a lot of my business circles, right? Yeah. And then people have this idea that I have all answers to all things veteran, and that's a misnomer if there ever was one. And it's like, well, how do I put out content, and how do I reach out to people, and how do I share what I know today and a goal to know more? And that's how we got here to this podcast, and it's because it comes from this. Okay, I'm not good enough. I don't have the answers, and no one, neither does anyone else. Well, if I throw out my perspective, I'm creating this ecosphere for others to throw out their perspective, and then we all learn. Because the alternative is I don't share my perspective, and we don't learn. Yeah. It's like this. Like I'm muddling through this grief thing. Loss thing in real time, and I know I'm going to feel better, and I'm going to have some more tools after this hour of talking with you, and I also know, as a good reminder, I'm not going to know shit at the end. Yeah, right. Like, and maybe that's the challenge, because in the military, it's like, unless the Army issued it to you, you don't need it, and it's like, well, I don't have the tool how to deal with grief.
Yeah, this isn't a logic thing. And the funny thing is like we're trying to have a logical conversation, right? Of how to look at this and how to perceive it. Yeah. And the reality is it doesn't work, right? Because we've already fundamentally made the mistake of looking at it from a perspective of right and wrong.
100%. I want this binary answer. Yes, no, time, right, place, uniform, course of action, whatever. Right? Even to the point I called my battle buddy from Iraq today, because he knew the guy that is going through some things right now, and he goes, first, like, after you get the initial shock, he's like, you probably should call your therapist and set up an appointment. I'm like, I have one tomorrow morning at I think 9:30, 10 a.m. Phone appointment. It was supposed to be today, and it got pushed one day. I can't remember why. And he goes, all right, that's good. Like, that was right. It was a very, very binary. Yeah. Right? You reach out to your battle buddy, like, hey, let's talk this through, and that's his answer. Well, talk to your therapist. What's going on this weekend? Right? I mean, that's
just don't even know how to.
And I don't fault him, because then he told me stories about some of the loss he had, and he had a situation he dealt with a family member recently where the family member pulled through a situation that they didn't anticipate, and it's like he went down this road, and then it didn't happen, and he's like, well, that was kind of fucked up. It's like he already whatever, right? And then and it's like, the military were like see ball hit ball, and
it's very logical.
It's like I even thought about like who like my business coach was a Marine. It's like, and I know I'm going to call him tonight or tomorrow to let him know what's going on. So if he sees some changes in me, he's already got, I'm not going to do this like, I'm going to figure it out on my own and maybe he'll not notice. No, I'm going to 100% call him and be like, hey, this fuck's what's going on. And, he's a little wiser than I. So he'll probably give me some advice similar to what we're talking about, which is like, hey, Andy, you need to feel this out and figure this out, and we're here for you. And now go feel. Right? Like that, I kind of already anticipate that being the answer. I'm still going to call it. Right? and this is the one thing I will say that is black and white, yes or no, truth, whatever, is the one choice you have to make. Veterans, you have to pick up the damn phone or show up, go somewhere, do something to let others know what you're going through.
Yeah.
Because like you said, Dylan, I need to work through this, and I will. And I also don't need to go it alone. Right. And so those are things you can do, right? Make others aware of it. Find people that will check in on you and hold you to a certain level accountable to yourself, right? And be there for you. You don't have to suffer in silence, and you have to struggle through this and suffer through this, whatever that verb is. You have to something through this,
right?
And you don't need to do it alone.
The idea.
Right before we got on the podcast here, I'm like, hey, Dylan, this is what I'm dealing with. I'm gonna hit record, and we're gonna figure this out. Mm-hmm. And you're like, yeah, let's go, right?
Yeah, and
I don't anticipate getting this phone call today.
I think the fear is being a burden, right? And this word, right? It's funny that it's just a word. We add this thing called connotation, which is implied meaning to something that already has a meaning, right? A burden is something, right? Realistically, it's just a heavy weight. But we've implied that being a burden, right? Like Andy looking at this situation from, if we were talking about this 25 years ago, you wouldn't have said this stuff because you might look at me and think, I don't want to be a burden on Dylan, right? I don't want to burden him.
Yeah, 5 years ago, 25. 5 years ago, I wouldn't have said that.
Well, it's just culturally, how.
Yeah. Oh, I see.
Right, like,
yeah.
So like you would have said in your mind, like, I don't want to burden Dylan with this emotional weight, right? And the reality of that is that you've built connotation on this idea that emotions are, when given, imply I take on something, right? And this is like my work is this is it, right? My job as a mental health coach is not to take your weight. It's not to take your burden. It's to allow you to express what is heavy on your soul. It's not, I don't have, just because you express it doesn't mean I have to take it. Right. And I don't, it's not my job to take on your loss. I'm going to feel it with you. Right. That's my empathy. I in a lot of ways, like, because you've lost, I'm now thinking of my losses. And this is a common connection point where you actually build comfort by talking about loss. But in no way am I taking on, Andy, any of your emotional baggage or burden and saying, wow, this is too much for me. Now, there are people that do that, and that's why the connotation exists, and that's why we do have to be careful with who we express ourselves with. But as a veteran, you have to recognize that when you express yourself to someone, you're not giving away this burden automatically. That doesn't mean someone else might not take it that way. But if that's the case, then find someone else, right? There are people out there, right? I guarantee you that your battle buddy will not do that to you, that they'll accept that you have an emotional need to express yourself. And they're not going to take that as a burden. They're going to look at that and say, how can I help? Because they would assume that you would do the same for them. And that's the connection we make, right? And we've made that connection. Why not use it? Why not utilize it and recognize it and use it for what it's meant for? We're supposed to help each other, right? That's what veterans are for, right? Is we look at each other and we say, I got you, right? At your darkest moment, I got you, right? Because I know that you would do the same for me. And that's why, today it's fantastic, right? Like, I was okay with not having this podcast because I was like, I got other things to do. But now, like, I look back at this and I'm like, I love that this is what happened, because it became something of, I think, great value, not only to you, Andy, but to me. Like, I clearly needed to express something, right? Something needed to come out, and it came out. And I hope it helps someone. I hope someone takes away from this and recognizes that pick up the phone. You're not a burden, right? You have emotional needs that need to be expressed, and people want to allow that for you. People want to give you that space, and they're not going to take that emotional that emotional baggage or that emotional burden that you think it is. It's not that. It's just expression. It's just you need to feel things. And I hope that what I did was an example of that, because we all need it. We all need it. I don't care how fucking stoic you are. You need it, right? Trust me.
Yeah, the goal here is to pick up the phone, process the feelings, understand the facts behind the feelings, qualify them. Those are all good things, right? Make sure your feelings are consistent with the facts presented, right? We're not going to get into the anxiety and not things that happen in the things that happen in the future that you're anticipating. No, not that. Like, qualify. No shit. I'm having these feelings because I've experienced this loss, or if it's not loss, qualify how you're feeling, understand how you're feeling, lean into it. Have a little cry if you have to, right?
Yep.
To your point, whether it's sitting in silence or meditating. I know I'm going to go for a drive tonight. So what I do, it's the time that I do. That's where I do my best thinking, right? It is what it is. So I'm going to go for a drive tonight, and I'm going to process it. I'm going to understand the facts behind it. I'm going to look at what I can do and what I can't do, right? The good serenity prayer. Like you said, anticipate the waves to a certain extent. And also I'm going to make sure, I tell it on a mountaintop. I make sure that the people around me understand what I'm going through, because then they can better understand how they can support me. You talked about, right? Hey, you said that at the beginning is, hey, I don't have to do this today. And me being a binary stickler says, hey, it's on the books, we're doing it. And I've also realized in my life, 9 times out of 10, I say, hey, we're doing something that I don't want to do in the moment. It's like I had to do it. Like I had to work through it. And for me, I'm like, no, I kind of knew this one. I easily could have sent you a text and been like, hey, not today. Earlier today, this Monday, I do all my content on Monday. I sent home the guys that do my videography, because that's more, hey, let's talk about business. I'm not in that vein, right? So I sent them home and felt fine. Oh, I shouldn't even say it. They came here, we started doing it, and it didn't work. I was a ball of fuck. And now this is different. So I really do appreciate you taking the time today for me, right? And that's what it came down to. I thought we had a guest and we didn't, and we could have. No, at the end of the day, as battle buddies, as humans, we got to be there for each other. So that's the challenge to everybody out there listening, and that's the charge. Is if you're stuck in the hole, screaming on a mountaintop, and if you hear someone screaming from a hole, jump into it with them. That's it. There's only 2 places you're going to be. You're going to be in the hole, or you're going to be out of the hole. And both people have a responsibility.
Yeah.
So today I appreciate you joining me in the hole and in the fighting position, because and knowing that you're a phone call away to jump back in, and also knowing that I got to figure out how to, I will get the support from many people to work my way out of this hole, and it's not happening overnight. I'm not gonna wake up tomorrow morning and boom, I'm out of the hole. So, one of my good mentors always tells me there's no thing as good news or bad news, new information, what you do with it. So today we use the situation that we're up against to share it with the world, to give clarity to those that seek it. And that's what we do. Every week here on the Welcome Home podcast, we talk about the transformation from service members in boots to veterans in the civilian worlds. We lean into what we have gone through, whether it was the trials, tribulations, the struggles, the victories. That's our goal. We do appreciate you joining us on this podcast. Looking forward to seeing you from future podcasts. If you'd like to be featured as a guest on this podcast, we'd love to have you. We want to grow and build this library of information for others to enjoy and for others to learn from. So if you feel like you'd be a good guest to be on a podcast, please reach out to us. LinkedIn, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, we can be found, and we'd love to hear from you. Dylan, any last words?
No.
All right. Thanks for joining us. Dylan, as always, thank you for being there for me, and we'll see you next week.